So, welcome to the KellFire Show. I'm Dr. Kelly Barron, and I am so privileged today to have Dr. Stephanie Bathurst. She's a sex and intimacy therapist. Oh, see, first blooper of the podcast. And founder of Bathurst Couples and Sex Therapy. Dr. Bathurst is the leader in fields of sex, relationships, and holistic mental health. So, welcome, Stephanie. If I can call you Stephanie. And
Please
I'm
do.
so excited to have you on today and to really dive. We haven't dived into this area yet, and I'm excited for everyone out there to. I'm sure it's a burning question. We have a million questions on this subject, so I know that this will be very beneficial for everyone. So just to start off, how did you get into this field?
Yeah, and thank you again for having me. I think this topic is not nearly talked about as much as it needs to be, just for us as women to have like the knowledge of how to care for our bodies appropriately as they age and develop. Um, this is a really important topic for me, one of my greatest passions in the field of relationship and mental health. Uh, I started specializing in sex therapy, I guess it was about 15 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And really, it came kind of naturally. I always knew that I wanted to be a counselor. So I kind of went through my schooling, graduated early from my programs. I knew I just wanted to dive in and be a therapist. Um, and in the early years of being a clinician, I just naturally took a more sex positive kind of approach. And I think because that's more difficult to find in some geographic areas and for some, client demographics, people in the kink and polyamorous communities kind of started just attracting to me because it was
Mhm.
difficult for them to find a trusted provider. And that kind of led me to want to get, for their benefit, want to get more educated. So I went back to school and got my PhD in clinical sexology, and it's just been like its own evolution from there, which has been really cool to experience and watch.
I think it's wild. I think having a degree in, being sexologist is like the honestly think it's really cool because it's such a taboo subject, and for women, we don't talk about it. Imagine if we did talk about it all the time and we normalized it, how much better our lives would be. But that's really cool that you did that. And Dr. Stephanie's coming live from Hawaii, so if our internet gets crazy, just know she's joining us from afar in the beautiful lands.
Yeah.
So, question that I have for you is, what is the most common sexual challenges for females in this sort of, I guess we're going to call it midlife range? I really don't like that term, but I guess it's the truest term that we can come with right now. But what are those challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them. One being that male and female bodies are very different. We each have our own aging processes. When we talk about hormone disruption, like andropause and menopause are the primary experiences, but they're very different. They present very differently, and they impact relationships, romantic relationships, very differently. And so I think a lot of the research, a lot of the discussions, a lot of the statistics that we hear about are more focused on male experience, and they don't normalize, validate, or really educate on female experience as we age. Um, and I think that's more complicated by um, I'm sure that you've heard about seeing aging as a disease that
Oh yeah.
that has preventative measures, more than just like, oh, that's normal, allow our bodies to age and decay as they traditionally do.
Mhm.
If we're taking more of the approach of prevention, then menopause is something that we are not like wanting to normalize and say it's okay and go through the night sweats and allow for all of those really negative experiences to just like be embraced, when there are measures that can ameliorate or even prevent that for quite a long period of time in women's lives. So I think a lot of that's complicated by just like The lag in medical care, like really embracing that kind of preventative measure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think like you hit the nail on the head. It's so many different women I've talked to. Um, they're like, "Well, we hit this. We're no longer able to have children. So, our biological reason for being, if you will, is done. And so we're on the down. And when we think about it like that, that's the psychological part of low libido and stuff that we can get into. I mean, I think that plays a huge part because we view ourselves as like deteriorating. We always say men age beautifully and women not so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that plays a huge part. And how then would you? I mean, it's being talked about a lot now how menopause impacts intimacy in relationships, and
How
if you could give a
much?
little insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, one, of course, it impacts desire, which always is problematic, especially if you have a partner who is very interested and there's a huge libido incompatibility at that developmental stage. Then we have things like resentment that's building and compounding over time when needs go unmet for a prolonged duration. And like aside from that relational stressor, we also have like pain during intercourse or even just any general sexual play because the elasticity and the lubrication is naturally declining as our hormones decline.
Right.
And so not only is the desire impacted, like it's more difficult to want it, but you also have negative conditioning that's coming into play. And if you're experiencing any kind of discomfort or pain during play with self or your partner, that negative conditioning also builds over time and creates this like natural aversion. If you think about like eating chicken parm and getting violently ill,
Right.
right? You're going to have an aversion to something that hurt you. That's just natural human instinct for pain prevention in the future. And that becomes embedded in our relationships as like a, and it manifests as avoidance essentially, which also builds resentment on both ends. And that's really difficult.
No, that's really hard. I mean, we're already
Yeah.
dealing with careers and kids and life in general, and then you compound that. This one just popped into my brain, but is there, let's say you've been together for a while and you're both going right into midlife, and let's say as the female, everything that you just spoke to, the changes, the lower libido, maybe the pain, the discomfort, compounded by the fact that you've been together for such a long time and sort of that spark, especially if it's on the male and female side, it's just becoming, I don't want to say chore, but it's just becoming a function.
Right.
And how does that really compound the issue?
Yeah, and it's hard when sex is mechanical, when physical touch becomes like robotic and more like muscle memory than an intentional exchange in a relationship. When that happens, we may be carrying out and like checking the box, but the experience is robbed, right? You don't get that kind of endorphin boost. You don't get that kind of like closeness and intimacy, which is really the underlying purpose of having those exchanges, is to reaffirm your bond with one another, to get through those difficult times. That is, life is unpredictable and it can be chaotic, and you need those attachment tethers to be strong in order to weather those storms. So when we have these kind of like mechanical exchanges and physical affection is no longer actually enjoyable, it's no longer bonding for the relationship, and it starts to I work with a lot of non-traditional relationships like structures, and so this isn't applicable for everybody, but for
Right.
almost everyone in a contracted monogamous relationship, the primary differentiator between you and your romantic partner, your spouse, and every other relationship you have in your life is the physical affection, is the sexual touch, right? Like that's the main differentiator that most people in my office identify. And so when that starts to wane, our relationship becomes, or it feels, less special than all the other relationships that exist in our life, and it changes the hierarchy of the relationship. it changes the priority in our experience, which affects the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was an awesome explanation of it because you could see where that the touch being special, like, and I'm not a therapist, so I can't speak to this. I'm just free flowing out loud.
Yeah.
Um, that 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 intimate relationship, the touch, like, and I don't want to say touch therapy, but the ability that it doesn't have to be full blown sex.
Right.
It's touching, and the comfort, the stability, the security, and that you two only share that. That's where you go when everything is so tough. So if we, especially at this stage when things are hurting or the libido's lower, you got vaginal dryness, you've got all the things going on, that if we looked at it more as just an experience in our relationship that only the two of us have versus, like you said, a mechanical physical function we have to perform. I, like, you just blew my mind with the way you described it. I absolutely loved that. I was like, wow, she is on to something.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's multi-purpose because our bodies are magic, right? Like they are so in tune to the input that we're giving it. It is like I hate the term "use it or lose it" because it's
Right.
very rigid, but it's very applicable in many ways. Like if we stop strength training, we lose muscle mass. Our bone
Mm-hmm.
density is impacted long term. If we stop experiencing orgasms, our body will stop making the hormones that are needed for sexual pleasure and experience because it assumes that we don't need it anymore. And so
Whoa.
physical, I know, isn't that wild?
Whoa. Never heard that
Yeah.
before. Okay, keep going.
So when we get really busy, when we deprioritize the relationship, when we don't resolve trauma or relational resentment, and there becomes this prolonged experience of non-touch or like lack of sexual expression for whatever reason, justified or not justified, our body doesn't really differentiate. It just sees this process as not being necessary anymore, and so it takes the energy reserves that was once being given to hormone production and gives it elsewhere. That's what our body does. It allocates energy to where it deems things are necessary. And so if it's deeming sex as being unnecessary because it's no longer happening, we're going to lose the hormones and the underlying building blocks that are needed to have optimal libido.
I never heard it explained like that. And it makes so much sense if you think about it. And then, so hormones, you open the not Pandora's box, but just the box of hormones. And while I've never heard that, and it makes so much sense, what impact does, I mean, we women are going through, men are going through it too, but it seems way more linear. We're going through, this whole thing with hormones, and how does that play into um, issues with sexuality and intimacy?
Yeah. So we are super complex beings, we being women. Men, although libido is always a multi-dimensional, uh, there are many variables that
Right.
impact and affect libido. For women, in comparison to male libido, we are significantly more complicated because we have many, many more variables, because our hormone balances are so complex. They wane from week to week based on our menstrual cycle, and they are heavily, heavily impacted by outside environmental stimuli, um, uh, by sleep deprivation, by nutrient deficiencies, but we're impacted by so much. And it's actually, when we're talking about desire and libido, like organically presenting in your body, it's both low estrogen, so estrogen deficiency, and estrogen dominance that creates low libido experiences. So as a clinician in the past 10 years, I've been seeing this kind of epidemic where like younger women are coming into my office and we're doing the testing and we're evaluating all these variables, and younger women are experiencing estrogen dominance because of all the xenoestrogens, the
Mm-hmm.
high inflammation in our bodies, all the autoimmune disorders that women are having now. But then once we start to get to middle age, our hormones are just depleting and dropping, and we have low estrogen, which also causes very similar libido responses. And so there, like the moderation point, there's a healthy optimal ratio of progesterone to estrogen. And we want to exist in that space, because being outside of that spectrum in any end is equally limiting for libido experiences.
So where does testosterone in a female come into play in libido?
Yeah,
At this
so
stage, or you could speak to it as in women's health in general, but
we need testosterone. Testosterone is equally important to female health and wellness and desire as it is in male. It's just that our balance of other hormones are so critical. So, like sex hormones, most people think of estrogen and testosterone, right?
right.
For women, progesterone, estrogen, and thyroid are huge impactors, right? We're looking at the balance more than we are the total number when we're thinking about like optimal functioning in the body. And it really, from my perspective, it doesn't really matter what age you're at. If I have a 21-year-old female and a 59-year-old female, when we look at the blood work, we're looking to have optimal functioning, not normal functioning. So we're not looking and evaluating based off of blood lab numbers, right?
Right.
And what's in the optimal range, because that is based off of your age and your age's like populous data of the US. But if you're 65, every 65-year-old woman in the US that has been whose data has been evaluated, your normal range is going to be what is normal for them, but we don't that's not necessarily aligned with what is healthy and optimal. It's just what's typical, and what's typical in the US is not always healthy, right?
Right.
um, so it's really the balance of progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, like the trifecta of those things that encourage optimal functioning. And then we just want to make sure that thyroid is not hyper or hypoactive. And then cortisol and insulin is managed, because those are always going to, if our body is stressed, we are naturally going to choose survival over sexual functioning. That's just basic, like, instinct. That's how our bodies are made. So we will always overproduce stress hormones if we're in that kind of fight or flight state, or if we're in chronic inflammation. Our body will prioritize stress response over sexual functioning and hormone regulation. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I think that's a huge one, cortisol, because I know it's like the buzz hormone right now, but it's so huge. If it that's such a manageable one, that if we just were we able to sleep better, if we were able to, women, we always like, well, we can't prioritize ourselves. We have to worry about everybody else. And so if you think about meditation or yoga or whatever it is that can bring you down in and lower your stress level, we go, well, oh no, that's indulging. We can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to you and knowing what goes on with cortisol, it's one of the simplest things that we can do. And if that means that that will help affect our other hormones, and like you said, go instead of going fight or flight, to look more in that direction in your libido and your sexual response, I think that's one we should be paying massive attention to. um,
Absolutely. And it really depends on, so if we're high in testosterone, if that's like more dominant than it should be, we're going to see things like um, PMDD, PCOS, um, endometriosis, all of these like presentations that make menstruation significantly less palpable and more painful for women. Um,
I did not know that with testosterone. Yeah.
and if we're low estrogen, we tend to be higher in progesterone. Everybody's different, right? So it's
Right.
hard to give like a specific number that you're looking for, because everybody's, again, it's really about the ratios of how they relate to one another, right? Like you want to, you can type in progesterone to an estrogen calculator into Google and put in your numbers, your PG numbers that you got from your most recent blood labs, and it will spit out and tell you for free what range you're in. If you're below 100, but really the optimal range is 500, if you're above or below 500, then something's kind of off. You want to talk with your provider and figure out, hey, what's causing this disruption? Am I chronically stressed? Do I have an autoimmune disorder that hasn't been managed? Have I not, is my HPA axis like dysfunctional and I'm in this stress response, even though I don't have stress in my life? Is my body physically stressed? Are all of these other things happening? So figure out what's going on. And that's kind of the detective work of a good provider. They're aware of all the variables. They can walk you through a checklist of like, have we looked at this? Have we looked at this? Do you have a history of TBI and spinal damage? How is your pelvic floor health? Is it weak? And your like the muscle contractions needed for libido response are just not functioning well. And those are all very different treatment plans, right? Which is why
Right.
it's so complicated for women to self-resolve libido uh, like disruption, because
Right.
you don't, one, they don't know where to look, and two, depending on what's going on, if you're experiencing like poor self-esteem, if you are deficient in magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin D, if again your pelvic floor health is super weakened, or on the opposite end, it's way too chronically contracted and sex is always painful, all of those treatment plans are so vastly different. And so it's hard for women to like figure out their stuff, you know?
So when a woman comes to you and they present with let's go in the libido range because I can imagine, and I could be wrong, libido, low libido and pain during sex are probably two of the bigger things that women present with. So if they come into you and they're saying, okay, I have low libido, and you just kind of laid out that you would say, hey, there's this like a laundry list of things that need to be looked at. But then where do they go with you? Do you go with, and everybody's different, a hormonal approach, a holistic approach, and obviously I know you probably tailor it for that individual, but how does that look when, if I come in and I tell you that?
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is like, how do you figure out the primary issue versus all the secondary symptoms that have
Mm-hmm.
spidered from that primary issue, right? Like, what do you
Right.
resolve first if somebody comes in and they have 5 or 10 of these variables that are present in their situation, which is an amazing question. Because we could easily, without organizing first, we could easily spend a year and a half attending to each of these variables. And that's not always conducive to one, finances, and
Right.
two, like quality of life. The whole purpose is to help women connect with their bodies and love their relationships. And so we want to have as efficient of a process as possible. And what I do to get to that process is go through all the variables. So we spend 1.5 hour session usually, literally just going through the checklist without diving into treatment for any one specific thing, so that at the end of that session we'll be like, okay, of the 50 variables that I have listed, you're resonating with 18 of them. Of those 18, what do we feel like started first? And what do you feel like is most problematic or impactful to your experience, your sexual experience, your view of yourself as a sexual being? And we kind of, filter through.
Right.
All of them are still priority, but the ones that we focus on is going to be based on their responses. And I think it's important to mention that when women come into my office, about 50% of the time when they're saying, hey, I'm having libido blockages, can you help me? My first response is always, is this only happening in your romantic relationship? Are you watching Hallmark movies and you're still feeling the warm and fuzzies when there's like a romance scene, are you still self-pleasuring? If you are, it's not a libido blockage. Your libido is active. You're still feeling it. It's a relationship issue. And then that treatment protocol is so vastly unique and nuanced in comparison to like if this is an organic libido blockage.
That's a really great point because just determining that alone would be so beneficial because you're right. It could, if you're still, looking at Fabio's soft cover romance and going, "Oh yes. Yes, it's just not over here that it's happening." So vastly different. Um which it's good to bring that up because I think a lot of women regard if they don't know or they're not paying attention to that, they're just going to overall feel broken or, something's defective or something's wrong. But spotlighting that, doing that little self check is a really great way to do that. Holistically, let's say nutrition, lifestyle, wellness, where would you, what path would you guide a woman down or some tips that are just easy to implement?
Yeah, I always request blood work if they haven't had it in the last year. I give blood labs, or if they have a medical provider that they're working with, I send my recommendations to the client, and they work that out with their medical provider. But knocking out any of the like biochemical blockages. So like if you have been okay, when we get to midlife, we have oftentimes accumulated deficiencies at that point. So maybe when we're 25, a vitamin B deficiency that has only presented in the last year or two is not going to be symptomatically as difficult or problematic for us as when we've had a vitamin B deficiency for 20 years, right?
Well,
And so middle age like is the prime time where our body's like, I'm done. I literally don't have the building blocks, the fats, the amino acids, the whatever, the nutrients, the trace minerals to produce these things for you anymore. And so we shut down these processes because of prolonged deficiency. And that will never be resolved if we solely focus on relationship repair or self-esteem building, all of which are important, but the nutritional deficiencies are forever problematic until we get those resolved. So I think getting blood labs done and really identifying like what's going on biochemically in your body, what processes are no longer happening because you don't have the means to produce anymore. So I think that's like looking at nutrition, very, very important, and one of the first things that I like to do.
yeah, that's a really great point because just like you said, we just accumulate these deficiencies and we it's easier in life to ignore it than address it. So just, oh well, maybe that's just the way I am, and you let it go. And then you're right, as things in our bodies right now are starting to shut down and we've had these deficiencies, we're not doing us any favors by that. And I think getting into the nutrition, like you said, and looking at that after blood work clearly,
Yeah.
and kind of identifying what's wrong and how can we address this. What about lifestyle changes, fitness, things like that?
Yeah, fitness very important. Just moving your body in general. It doesn't have to be like high intensity interval training. You don't have to be like at a cycling class every day.
Right.
But moving your body is really critical for disease prevention and for circulation and libido, like physiological arousal at its oversimplified form is just circulation. It's just engorgement of that like reproductive area. When you feel the warm and fuzzies, it's blood being diverted to that area for sexual experience. So when we don't move our bodies, when we are living more of a sedentary life, we're having circulation blockages. Like our bodies are not able to move blood to the areas that are needed when we feel desire. And so it's hugely important to include some kind of fitness in there on a regular basis. And then really identifying, because most people come into my office and they've already talked with medical doctors in all these different fields. A lot of people have things like chronic foot pain, or like Achilles tendonitis or bone spurs, or they have things like bruxism, TMJ, like
Mm,
jaw pain, they're just clenching or grinding all the time.
right.
They've had some kind of sexual trauma, or like physical trauma during birth, a lot of like scarring from the C-section or whatever. All of these very real things. For a lot of people, they seem to be, because their physical and libido feels very psychological, they seem to be separated or compartmentalized, and they're not. Like, we know that there are fascia lines connecting both the jaw and the foot to your pelvic floor directly. So whenever we're experiencing jaw pain or foot pain, it torques, it changes our pelvic stability and strength. And so we want to go through, like, what have you already been diagnosed with? Do you have postural orthostatic tachycardia, like POTS, which is actually much more common now after COVID, particularly in women? Well, that causes anxiety and it disrupts your circulation, which is naturally going to impact your libido. And so, what are you doing to treat these things, and how can we support that? So, a lot of those questions are early in the conversation, too.
It just seems like dominoes. Like
It
if one's
is.
falling, they're all gonna fall.
This cascade effect, which, like, as a provider, I enjoy those complex cases, because one, it provides clarity about it provides clarity to the clients about, like, the interconnectedness of our bodies and our systems. Like, there is no real true compartmentalization. Everything is intertwined with everything else, and so it's not as simple as, like, oh, well, I don't really want to deal with this other thing that seems overwhelming or complicated or stressful, or my partner's not interested in being involved in that process. So I'm just going to back burner this and only focus on this. But that's part of the problem. That's not how physical, sexual, relational health works. Everything is intertwined with everything else. And I love those cases because they're always different, they're always new, they're always interesting, and when we bring everything together, it provides so much clarity and perspective for the client.
I can imagine it's just life altering when you start working on all the different pieces and you had no idea these were all interconnected. And you go, really? If I dress this, I'm going to feel this. It's going to get better. Or I think that that's amazing, and it's so complicated. And women were so complicated, but
We are.
if we just started, like you said, with basics, like start at blood work and nutrition, see where you're at, baseline yourself, and then start working on all these different things. Because obviously there's physical and then there's mental. If you have like a woman that comes in midlife, whether she's perimenopause, menopause, she's going through the symptoms, and outside of what we probably know is going to be her hormones are out of whack at this point. There's no balance, or you're working on hormonal balance. So let's say there's the larger, you know, either mental component or maybe some physiological stuff. But what tools, devices, suggestions, how would you tell a woman that's like, I don't I don't even want to I want separate beds. I don't even need the same bed anymore.
Yeah, so to help focus on her own connection to self as a sexual being, it's
Yes.
not even, we don't want to focus on the relationship at the beginning, right? Because it's not really about the relationship at the beginning, it's the connection and trust with your own body. And so it's more about, like, one, buying into the importance of you being a sexual being, because for a lot of women, especially women who have experienced physical or sexual trauma, or religious, like, embedded shame with their sexual expression, because there's so much complexity to, like, cultural impacts on sex. Those are the things that we want to, like, support at the beginning. So it's really about how do you enjoy? Like, what does your body like? What does it not like? You want to make sure that you're not experiencing pain in any kind of way. So, what kind of lubricant feels good for you? What kind of toys best impact your like experience? Help them buy in to why sex is important in the first place. Sex with themselves to start,
Right.
um, because there are so many healthy, appropriate reasons to engage in physical touch and sexual pleasure, not related to the relationship in any kind of way, right? Like
Right.
to increase natural production of sex hormones, to ameliorate pain. Like they've done studies, and um, all of the triptan migraine medicines,
Hmm.
orgasm is equally, if not more effective than those medications in treating migraine pain. So
Whoa.
I know
You
we live
just
in
made the case.
so there's so many reasons for why you to induce really good sleep, right? To regulate your circadian rhythm, to reduce stress hormones and help with muscle relaxation. There is so much to increase like physical stamina and sexual fitness, or just general fitness for cardiovascular health. So many reasons why sex is important. That is the first, because if a woman comes in and they genuinely believe that sex is not important for them, it doesn't enhance their quality of life, it has no purpose at this developmental stage, nothing is going to be effective, right? Because they
Right.
won't want it. You have to want it in order for there to be real resolution. And you can't want it for somebody else. You have to want it for yourself. You have to believe it's important. It's an important part of who you are, so that you don't want to lose it.
I think women just, again, there's the confidence, there's the
Hmm.
letting go of any guilt or shame, that it's okay to be a sexual being, even at this stage of life. I think women get to where they have children, they're like, oh, well, I can't be like that. I can't be like I was in my 20s. I can't enjoy it like that because I have children and I'm a mother and there's a certain stereotype I have to fall into right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at this stage for females, we're just getting started. It's different. I get it. The hormones, vaginal dryness, pain, these things, but it's at this point where we're like we've done everything we needed to do and we're way more confident than we're in our 20s, and we should be like experimenting all the time or trying new things. And I don't know if that's true necessarily, but it's what I try to tell people is that you're just getting started. Like there's a whole world out there.
100%. I'm so loving everything you just said, because I believe in the exact same thing. Like when people come in and they're like, I'm an empty nester. Like we raised our children. They're relatively grown and self-sufficient and independent, and my world, my purpose is no longer to keep them alive and to create good people. What do I do with my time and my energy, and what is my purpose now, and what bonds our relationship? This is the time when you have the most freedom, while also knowing exactly who you are and what you want out of life. Like the only other time that we have that level of freedom as women is when we are very young, and
Hmm.
we don't know what's going on. We don't know who to trust. We are still figuring out our attachment and our purpose in life. And then we get married and we have children, and that consumes 20 years of our life. And then they grow up, and we have this like beautiful opportunity to re-experience life and all that it has to offer. Um, but it's difficult to make that transition, to shift from being so other centered to being self focused, which is not the same as selfish, right? Like
Right.
being able to choose yourself and prioritize loving life and connecting with your body is not being like a is not equivalent to being a narcissist, right? Those are so
Right.
conflated because there's such expectation for women to be caregivers all the time. But we also need to take care of ourselves. That's part of being nurturers. That's part of being caregivers, is giving ourselves the care and the love that we deserve too.
Well, I don't know if you've heard of I just recently started reading a lot about the hierarchy of female stereotypes and, or not stereotypes, just the hierarchy of where we are in our
Yeah.
age groups. And, like you said, when you're coming into when you're younger and you're just coming into your childbearing years, you're the maiden. You have all this freedom in the world. You don't have children, but you also don't know. And your hormones are also going out of whack at that point too. But you have the most freedom. And then you're the mother, and that's your childbearing years. And you're not prioritizing yourself. That's not even on the radar. But then, like you said, then the third one that was always out there was the crone, and that was, oh, you're done having kids, and now you're grandma or your great grandma, and you're doing all these things. And they started to discover that, or they did a lot of research that these last two generations, Gen X and millennials now, we have this time period where we're not grandmas. It used to be,
Mm-hmm.
you had kids young, they had kids, and now there's this time period. So there's um, this new level called the wild woman, which is exactly what you just expressed. It's this time period where you're not a grandma, but your kids are just getting out of the house, they're in college, you're empty nesters, and like I think, ladies, this is your time to shine. Like get those heels out.
100%.
Just get it out and just start experimenting, having fun, be a crazy sexual being, enjoy it. No, be your own. You are in your own now. Like you said, you've lived through a lot. And it's not time to just pull the polyester pull-ups on and the orthopedic shoes yet. You've got a lot of dancing to do. And the things that you've already gone through, they show where, yeah, we might get stuck in some of these issues physiologically or psychologically, but this is our time to unlock them and work on ourselves. um, I do have a question now, and maybe it's an antiquated word, but aphrodisiacs slash libido enhancing, whether there's supplements or potions, tinctures, whatever you want to call it. Is that something that I know that's probably going to skirt into hormones and nutrition now, but is there anything or something that you recommend for women? Or is it a myth?
No, definitely not a myth. I think the most common known aphrodisiac is like oysters, right?
Right.
Um, and we know that they're super high in trace minerals like zinc, right? Which are
Yeah.
very much needed for blood flow and circulation in your body. So at the very least, so there are different categories of what makes. I'm also an herbalist, so I kind of delve into this
Oh,
a
I
little bit
love
as
this.
well. Yeah.
Love
Um,
this.
there are different categories for what makes aphrodisiacs like an aphrodisiac, right? Just like there are specifics for what makes an herb an adaptogen or a nervine or a nootropic. So aphrodisiacs are any kind of substance that enhances circulation, um,
Mm-hmm.
any substance that provides a stimulus experience, a sensory experience that reminds you of desire. So, like, I'm trying to give an example because I just used the example of like mussels or oysters, right? But
Right.
when you're swallowing that kind of like gelatinous-y thing, it's very sexual in nature, like sensory wise. And
Wow.
so that also makes it an aphrodisiac, that kind of like lubrication kind of experience. We are also looking for anything that increases nitric oxide, which is a very necessary chemical that travels through the bloodstream and helps with circulation. So any kind of like cruciferous vegetables helps with nitric oxide.
Yeah,
Um,
Brussels sprouts, here we go.
I know, yeah. And like beets are amazing for circulation and
Yeah.
have a lot of critical nutrients too. And so, yeah, it's aphrodisiacs are very much a real thing, but they are bedded in like what nutrient deficiencies are aiding in the blockage of libido for you. Based on that response, we're gonna recommend different aphrodisiacs for you. And then anything that gives that kind of like heat to your body. So like chili peppers, all of the spicy spices like
Mhm.
nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, vanilla is an aphrodisiac because the olfactory response to vanilla scent in particular is higher than a placebo in producing desire for men in particular, um,
Really?
which is really interesting. And then for
Mhm.
women, it's more about like the wild rose kind of scent. Um,
Wow.
I know, yeah. It's fun to dive into this topic because there's so much that we can talk about and like play with to enhance experience. Um, there are there are three things that studies have scientifically proven to be effective in enhancing female libido, specifically for treating medication induced libido effects. So, like if you're taking an SSRI or if
Mhm.
you have taken one in the last 2 years, the SSRI could be impacting your libido as a woman. And these three things help counteract that effect so that you have access to your organic desire again. Um, so, maca root, maca root, which is
Yep.
starting to become a lot more popular. You've heard of
It
it?
is. I've seen
Yeah.
it quite a bit. You
Yeah.
see, I'm taking notes. Do you see I'm taking
Yes,
all the
yeah.
notes right now? Maca. Okay.
So, and these three things work synergistically with one another. So, if you're going to take it, take them all together because they support and enhance each other's properties. So, we have maca root, we have saffron powder, or if you want to do
Yeah.
like the food as medicine, using saffron in your cooking with like rice and meats and stuff. Which is a part of a flower. It's like the
Yeah.
little what is it? The stamen of a
Yeah,
flower.
like the little pollinator guy.
Yeah, yeah.
That's an
Um,
official term, the little pollinator guy.
Pollinator, I love it. And then wild rose essential oil.
Okay.
So those three, and that can be applied on your chest, or it can be diffused in the room 30 minutes to an hour before you're wanting to experience libido effects or desire.
That's what I was going to ask you before you got into the wild rose. I was like, wait, can you do a tea out of this? But no. But you sexy time tea. But no, you're getting you can't go in the room. We're getting it ready for sexy time. We gotta let it go. It's sexy time in there.
Love
Right
it.
now,
Yeah.
all I know is women everywhere are like, I'm going to buy some wild rose oil. That room is going to have vanilla everywhere. And circulation, circulation, circulation. Those are my takeaways right now.
Yeah, I mean it's really it we're talking about how complex female libido is, but the treatment protocols for most of these things are very like these are very treatable things. Once we identify what's going on, what are the core issues and how to prioritize them, each of these have known treatments, which is so like I'm saying that to inspire hope. I'm sure that a
Right.
lot of women have been listening and they're like, oh, I don't even know where to start, this is so overwhelming. And it doesn't have to be. You just need to find the right provider who can help you organize the information and break down the treatment for each of these things one thing at a time. Like you said earlier, everything is intermixed. You just have to start in one place, and like a domino effect, things will begin to resolve.
I think that's amazing. I'd love one time to just sit and talk with you simply about like some of the things that we just at the end got into. I'm like, oh, we could do an hour about like
Oh,
setting the
definitely.
room and sensory. So if you ever want to do that, please. But before we kind of wrap up, and then I have three fun questions. Any other tips, any other suggestions, or just advice recommendation in general for women in this stage that are feeling like I'm not a sexual being anymore. And I don't understand why.
Yeah, I do want to empower every woman to recognize that we are made to be sexual beings. Like we're literally built. It's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. And to deprioritize or to block that part of yourself is to really restrict a part of your identity. It's to lose a part of who you are. And that infiltrates, like blocking away or feeling shameful of any part of you is going to infiltrate every single life domain. It's going to impact your confidence at work. It's going to impact how you communicate and teach your children. It's going to impact the fulfillment of all relationships, familial, platonic, romantic. It impacts everything. And so it's not as like I just it's hard to get across the importance of embracing and recognizing your sexual self. But it truly does, it impacts your entire world in every kind of way. And we deserve to feel the most out of life. And you can't do that with removing a sexual part of your being. And so I'm so grateful of the work that you do and that we do in empowering women to recognize all parts of themselves and to legitimize like the work and the time and the resources that are needed to really heal and connect to those parts.
Yeah, I think this was a good conversation, and again, we could go on for hours on this, but that little takeaway right there is what every woman should just embed in her brain, memorize, and embrace and celebrate. That this is our wild woman era, and even if you're younger, just never give up, never lose sight of who you are and what you're supposed to be. So three things on the spot. If you can't think of anything, don't worry about it. And I'll give you a leeway with this. If you could put a theme song to either your journey as a sexologist, sexual therapist, or this stage of women's life in general in the arena of sexual health, what would that be? I have a playlist on Spotify that every guest gives a song, and so it's all over the place.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, hmm. The only songs that are coming to my mind right now are Taylor Swift songs because I have a 4-year-old and she loves Taylor Swift and that's
That's
all that I'm
why Taylor
listening
Swift is good for these.
to. Can I look up I don't even remember the names. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hmm. I think maybe like Shake It Off
I like that because that's true.
because you're like your sexual health exploration is um there are always going to be bumps, like oopsies moments and embarrassing moments, and when
Oh yeah.
shit just doesn't work. Like that's just part of the
Yeah.
experience, right?
Right.
Um, Shake it off, let it go, keep moving. Don't let those things block your life happiness and joy. You deserve it, and just keep moving forward. That's part of like learning for everybody. We all have those moments.
All right, I like that. That's a really good one. Plus, it's going to be popular. Everybody's going to love that one. If you could give a title, it could be a title you just made up, or it could be a movie, a book, anything like that. What would you call this stage or this arena?
Mm. I think like the magical miss. Like,
Magical Miss?
yeah.
Ooh,
Um,
I like that.
because we really are like our bodies and our ability to feel deeply and connect with other and like fuse networks and groups, we are truly magical. We don't feel that. Our culture and societies still like have a lot of negative connotations for how magical we are or like what our powers are. But we are so strong. We're so resilient. We have so many unique skills that like that men just don't have, and those deserve to be celebrated and recognized, not like quieted, essentially.
I feel like that's I feel a book coming on that you need to write that's entitled Magical Myths. I would be the first person. I want an autographed copy. Um, I mean, honestly, I think you should, and that should be the title of it. That's awesome.
I love
Um,
it.
Last question could be if you could name a drink after this. Now, it could be a mocktail, a cocktail. Does not have to have alcohol in it, but if you could um, give a drink to this, and I'll give you, if one's popped to your head, shout it out. If you haven't thought of one yet, I can give you examples of what some women have said, and obviously it's not the same thing. One woman, she was talking about her hysterectomy, and Bloody Mary was hers. One woman was talking about a really bad menopause experience, and it was dark and stormy. But um, what would come to your brain?
So what's coming to my brain is not, and I'm not really a drinker, but when I was a drinker, I did not like Fireball, but that's what's coming to my mind because it just reminds me of like find your fire, get your passion back, go create that spark for yourself.
I
Um,
like it.
so yeah, that's not my like taste wise my preference, but that's definitely the drink that's coming to mind.
No, I like that. That is perfect. I had one male guest on. He was talking about his experience with his wife, and it was hilarious. And she fully consented to everything. And he came and he was sitting here in the studio, and he brought Fireball. And
Oh
he
my
didn't name
god.
that at his drink, but he was like, "Yeah, this is how I'm feeling right now with this experience." So that's a great one. I love that. Um, well, Stephanie, thank you so much. Give a shout out to any of your social media websites so everybody can find you and follow you.
Absolutely. Everybody can find me at bathurstfamilytherapy.com. So it's all one word. I'm on Facebook, Bathurst Family Therapy. I'm on Instagram, which is phd.relationship.expert. I do a lot of like short clips on relationship and sexual health
Oh, that's
recommendations. So check
great.
those out. Yeah, a lot of education. And yeah, we do intimacy based couples retreats all year round in Hawaii and Florida. I have a 90-day Roommates to Romance online program, which is pretty amazing. And if anybody's interested in taking a free relationship energy type quiz, you can go to myflowtypes.com and take a free quiz and figure out what kind of energy type you are.
So I know we all want to come fly out to Hawaii, although I didn't know about the Florida. That's good. But we want to come out to Hawaii to see you. But can folks work with you online or in certain states? Can they work with you virtually?
Yes, definitely. I'm licensed as a therapist, as a clinical provider in Hawaii, Maryland, Virginia, and Florida. And then for the other states, I provide coaching.
Awesome. I love it. So I hope everybody at least goes and watches your videos and your social media. I know I will be. And again, if you ever want to come on again and go into the other areas, because there's so many that you cover, I would love that. But thank you so much. I'm jealous of your weather right now, and I hope you have a very wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Hey everyone, I just wanted to tell you guys about our supplement line. If you haven't already heard, I put a lot of time and effort into sourcing out what I think are the most important things for women's health in this transition in our lives. And we have Dr. KellFire's potions and elixirs. What we have first is a vegan vanilla protein powder. We also have, this is one of my favorites. It's prebiotic and probiotic. It's a greens powder. So you get your greens, you get your fruits, but you do really attack that gut health and balance that out. So I'm a big fan of Thrive. We also have apple cider gummies. If you've ever had apple cider vinegar, you know how harsh that is to take. So we have our gummies, and they are apple flavored, and they're really good. Supports metabolism. We have the lovely collagen and biotin combo in liquid, so it's awesome. You can put it in your drinks, you can put it in your teas, you can just shoot it in your mouth. I love tinctures, but collagen biotin for hair and nails, because that is extremely important at this time in our lives. 8-in-1 mushrooms, illumination. I love this product. It's 8 different nootropic mushrooms that supports immunity, anxiety, mental state, awareness, focus. This is my favorite, baby. And then I probably shouldn't have said that because this one is my favorite, baby. This one is bovine glandular. So this is derived from bovine uterus. This is for hormone balance and libido support. This is a staple, and I think it should be a staple in every woman's wellness kit. All of our supplements you can get on mytempesta.com. Just hit the shop link and everything there. You can get it one time. You could sign up for a subscription with discounts and they'll just come to your door. It will spark your wellness journey and ignite your fire.